The job classification is at the heart of Interact HRMS, and it is the driver of the recruitment module as well as most of the talent management modules. So obviously it is a key foundation element, just like the organization management module and the employee groups and employers that you need to define. You need to have a structure in your job classification. You need to classify your jobs. So in Interact, you can have a very detailed and comprehensive description of your jobs in the organization, and there's a lot of logic that it ties into that. But let me just show you the basics here. At a minimal level, if you were to just be looking for a straightforward payroll system and you just concerned with making sure employees get paid, then all we need really is a job title for every employee and a code that is associated with that. Everything else is pretty much optional and is not mandatory or fundamental for what we're trying to do. However, if you're trying to use Interact HRMS as an enterprise HR solution, then you're going to want to use a lot more information. And you see that there are a lot of additional fields here. Many of them are not mandatory. The only ones that are mandatory are the ones that are in bold here. But you notice here, you can have more than just a straightforward job title. You can have a secondary job title and a business card job title that's associated with that job. So the title that shows on the business card will be different. You can define the primary skills associated with a particular job and the primary specialty. That information can be used when you're doing performance appraisals or when you're looking to do recruitment for that particular job. You can also set a default value for the pay type and the contract type if you're using employment agreements and contracts. And then we get into the actual job classification. We have job groups, job classes, job categories. We can classify them by industry and occupation. And then you get into other country-specific classifications. For example, workers' comp, EEO classification, and so on. You have the minimum and maximum job level that you can define. You can track job details in terms of reporting for the labor department. You can define the primary responsibility for a particular job, and you can set up whether there are any restrictions in terms of the region in which this job may apply, whether or not this job can be published, whether this is a supervisory job, whether there are any gender restrictions for this particular job, whether this job is associated with specific organization units or employee groups only, and so on. Then we get into the job requirements. There are minimum education requirements that you could define, orientations, training, certification, overtime eligibility, and so on. And that information is also available up here. You see all these additional tabs. You have the grade that is associated with this job, both the minimum and maximum grade, which allows me also to look at minimum maximum salary and mid salary. Then I can do some basic budgeting for that particular job. I have a job description right here. I have the education requirements for the job. I have the skills required for this job, the certifications needed in this job, the experience you should have to hold this job, the interview questions that should appear on the interview sheet if somebody's interviewing for this particular job, the training courses associated with the job, the competencies and the level at which you need to exhibit these competencies in order to hold this job. You have the Hey job evaluation method. If we're not using grades and steps in order to determine the appropriate pay for an employee, you can follow the Hey job evaluation method. Okay? It's not active right now because I have my job grading set up, which is linked with my position budgeting and control. I also have the risks associated with a job because risk management, for example, is associated with jobs, organization units, employees, and so on. And you could define some default labor allocation on how you will allocate the cost of an employee who holds this particular job, irrelevant of the location where they're working or the cost center that they're associated with. Normally, you might have a standard rule to split this cost over two specific cost centers or activities. Now, this job classification, like everything else in Interact, is flexible. Of course, I have a lot of reports for that. If I were to show you our setup, you see you can define the Hey job evaluation method. If I go to the general setup for the job, you notice I can follow a grade step classification. I can have the Hey classification. I can use the EEO classification, or I can just make it mandatory or non-mandatory to use job classification. I can also use band-based grade compensation and turn on the versioning so you can have multiple versions of the same job. If I'm using Hey classification, I would be defining my accountability, problem solving, and know-how dimensions and the detail behind that, the points associated with that. You see there's some unique settings here that would allow us to define specific details in terms for this particular job. When we set up the job reporting lines, you can use administrative, functional, and technical reporting. You can have a limit in terms of how many jobs one can report to, the number of reporting lines per job, and then in the job chart, you can define a job chart that will allow us to see how these jobs are related. What else do we do in our job classification? You can set up specific earning policies, allowance policies, benefits, bonuses, commissions, deductions, and so on that are particular to the job only. Okay, and again, a lot of things in our product are highly configurable. Even EEO1, which is of course a standard in the US, could be configurable because our system, in case there are any changes in the future in the way that works, we will not need to do any customization. The system will automatically pick it up correctly. If I go in right here under my activity level, you see I have the job catalog, the job reporting structure, and the job reporting structure chart. For example, if I want to look at the job reporting structure, I can show you, you can basically set up the reporting lines that depend on the job title and the job that you're in. You see for the medical assistant right now, I have the medical assistant reporting to the healthcare assistant, and that's a functional reporting line. And you notice that it has a specific scope of authority, so that we can define the scope of authority, which means that this person would be responsible for approving certain things for people in this job title, and I can define the effective date for this relationship. Okay, so we can define structure. The whole system of Interact is about structure. The more structure you can define, the more the system can automate for you. And that is what we're trying to do in the end. We're trying to save the HR and payroll department's time so that they can focus on talent management, on finding, developing, and keeping the right talent in the organization. And the job classification obviously is a key component because that is where you actually define what that talent means for you. That will tie into your performance management, your career planning, your training management, your succession planning, and so on. All of it is one single solution. All of it is fully integrated. But keep in mind, at the most basic level, all you really need is the job code and the job title. Everything else is additional information that will make your data far more powerful, far more flexible to use.